Salute, my Quickclassics friends, on this chilly West Texas afternoon, rather unseasonable September weather. I think it's in the 50s right now. That's fine with me. I enjoy the fall. Um Welcome again to the continuation of the discussion on classical education. As always, thank you for tuning in, and if you enjoy the content, click a like and hit that subscribe button down below and share. And let's get started talking about the quadrivium. Now, last time we spent the bulk of the episode of Quick Classics talking about the trivium system in the context of classical education. This, of course, being the ancient curriculum of the Academy and the Lyceum that went through updates during the medieval and Renaissance periods, and even in the Enlightenment and modern era as well. The trivium, of course, consisting of those three phases: grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which you would finish up around the age of 15 or 16. Now, the quadrivium, as the name suggests, consists of four parts or four phases. And by the time the Middle Ages rolled around, this would be the equivalent of higher education, limited though the access might have been. And the four phases of the quadrivium had to do with numbers. In fact, they were sometimes called the numbered arts. Um, and when you add these to the three phases of the trivium, you get seven, the seven classical liberal arts. But the quadrivium consisted of arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. And they were thought to represent numbers being used in the case of arithmetic, being used stationary. In the case of geometry, numbers being used in space and movement. Numbers in the astronomy phase encompassing the great dimensions of both space and time. And in music, numbers and time. Now, these would have all been taught, of course, in conjunction with the humanities as well, history and languages, to provide cultural context, ethics, and morality, those sorts of things. It's thought that the grafting on of the quadrivium and the further kind of Christianizing of the classical system can be attributed to the likes of, to an extent, I think, St. Augustine, but especially Boethius. And if you don't know who Boethius was, he was a Christian philosopher in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, and he's famous for writing one of the Christian classics, a book called The Consolation of Philosophy, which is an excellent work if you've never read it. At any rate, we could trace this grafting on to the curriculum back to Boethius. And throughout the Middle Ages, this was the equivalent of higher education, and it prepared you for more advanced courses of study in philosophy, in theology, and in the law as well. So the trivium and the quadrivium were considered foundational if you wanted to go on to these more advanced systems of study. And eventually you could probably throw medicine in with that as well. But the trivium, along with the quadrivium, were thought to impart to a student, to an individual, the essential elements of thinking that were rooted in the classical world, in the Greek world, and in the Roman world. Those essential elements of antiquity. And of course, the trivium and the quadrivium continue to be important in the resurgence of classical education in it's called alternative education, which is kind of odd in my estimation, but it's one of the forms of alternative education that's really making a comeback. Classical education in the form of private schools in the form of Christian classical academies. There are even some charter schools who use classical curriculum, and the homeschooling movement is very vested in the ideas of classical education grafted on with Christian ethics, very much in the vein of what you see the Irish monastic tradition, or that of Boethius, or even Charlemagne's palace schools, which were created under the auspices of monks and teachers like Alcuin of York, that we discussed in the our last discussion about classical education. But the trivium, again, along with the quadrivium, rounds out the 7 classical liberal arts. And so now you have a very general understanding of what classical curriculum is, what exactly that entails, and its purposes in terms of building foundational thinking skills, and also why it's not just a novel approach to education. It's really the best approach to education, because it harnesses the developing traits and attributes of the different phases of childhood. And I'll probably be saying, well, I'll definitely be saying more about classical education in future episodes of the Quickclassics, but I just wanted to do this little 2-part series on classical education, because it is making more news these days, and in the changing educational environment of this strange pandemic dystopia world that we find ourselves in, when people are looking for alternatives for conventional education, it's important to know that the classical curriculum is available out there, and that there are teachers and instructors such as myself who are capable of connoting as Dorothy Sayers put it in her excellent essay, the lost tools of learning. The fact of the matter is that they've never really been lost. They've just been misplaced and not used in the curricula of many countries. And that's a tradition, particularly in the West, that if we're to regain our momentum and trajectory, I strongly believe that classical methodology has to make a comeback. It's not an if and or but sort of proposition. It has to come back if we're to put things back on track. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this little synopsis of the Quadrivium, and that rounds out our discussion on classical education. If you like the content, click a like, subscribe, and share. And I'll be seeing you on the next episode of Quick Classics. Godspeed.